of the Committee of Infrastructure, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of COVID-19 pandemic, and in accordance with the governor's emergency order number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. Please note that there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously, that word there, to this meeting, which was authorized pursuant to the governor's emergency order. However, in accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that we are A, providing public access to the meeting by telephone and additional access possibilities by video and other electronic means. To access Zoom meetings, please refer to the agenda for the city website for the link. To join by phone, dial 1-929-205-6099. The meeting ID is 869-0708-8762 with a password 834985. B, providing public notice of the necessary information for assessing the meeting. We previously gave notice to the public of a necessary information for assessing the meeting, through public postings. Instructions have been provided on the City of Nashua website at www.nashuanewhampshire.gov and publicly noticed at City Hall and the Public Health Department. C, providing a mechanism for the public to alert the public body during the meeting if there is problems with access. If anybody has a problem accessing the meeting via phone or channel 16, please call 603-821-2049 and they will help you connect. D, adjourning the meeting if the public is unable to access the meeting. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting via the methods mentioned above, the meeting will be adjourned and rescheduled. Please note that all votes taken during the meeting shall be done by roll call vote. Let's start the meeting by taking roll call attendance. When each member states their presence, please also state whether there is anyone in the room with you during this meeting, which is required under the right to know law. Alderman Schmidt, can you please take the roll?
I can. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Alderman at Large Michael O'Brien Sr.
Present, I can hear, and I am alone.
Alderman Thomas Lopez.
I'm present, I can hear, and I am also alone.
Alderman Jan Schmidt, I am present. I can hear everyone, and I am alone as well. Alderman Ernest Juddy.
I'm here. I can hear everyone. And my wife is also with me.
Alderman David C. Tenza.
I am present, I'm alone, and I can hear everyone.
Alderman Ben Clemens.
I am here, I am by myself, and I can hear everyone.
Alderman at Large Brandon Laws.
I'm here, I'm mostly alone, and I can hear everyone.
That would be 2, 4, so that's 7 members are present.
Okay. Any other aldermen that are present? I thought I saw Alderman Lou.
Alderwoman Lou is here.
Okay.
Alderman Klee, Alderman Dowd. Have I missed anyone?
Also, we have Director Tim Cummings and Director Sarah Marchant also with us this evening.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All
All
right.
members present.
Very good. Thank you to the clerk. Presentation and communications. There will be a discussion relative to the downtown Riverfront concept plan. I'm going to recognize the Economic Development Director, Tim Cummings. And Mr. Cummings, I'll pass the meeting at this time over to you.
Thank you, sir. Again, for the record, Tim Cummings, Director of Economic Development, and I appreciate everyone making time this evening. So first, before I begin, I should say I know that this group doesn't get together all that often in the summer. So at the conclusion of the formal remarks, and later on the agenda, if there's just general discussion about various topics of economic development that the group wants to discuss, I'll be hanging around throughout the entire meeting, and we can talk about miscellaneous topics of interest at the end of this meeting, and happy to do so, because I know that there's various projects that are out there besides this one that various folks have expressed an interest in. But putting that piece of business aside, the reason why we wanted to have this meeting is it seemed like a good time to check in with the Board of Aldermen relative to the design efforts that we are undertaking for the implementation of the Riverwalk in the downtown area on our river. So before we get into the actual concept plan and the details, I asked Director Marchand to join us this evening because I'd like her to provide just a quick overview of how we got to where we are today in terms of the efforts that we undertook early on to prepare for the plan that you're about to see this evening. I want to just set the stage appropriately by making sure folks know that we are designing to a budget. There is not going to be a substantive numbers conversation this evening because we're too early in the design process. So we don't have good numbers. I don't want to suggest certain numbers that may turn out to be inaccurate. But what we are trying to do is have a facilitated conversation with you to give us direction that we're going in the right direction and to hear what your priorities may be. So as we design to that budget, we can continue to go down certain paths or not go down certain paths depending on the feedback we get. This will be one of multiple check-ins along the way. And with that being said, I'll hand it off to Sarah Marchand before Greg gives the formal remarks with his team. So Sarah?
Thank you, Tim. Sarah Marchand, Community Development Director. This project started in 2017 when the city went out for an RFP and brought on Helverson Design, that is part of the team before you tonight with VHB, to facilitate a downtown riverfront master plan. We created a website, went through many months and a 3-round iterative process of hearing from the public, kind of putting that, what we heard, to paper, and then getting reactions back on that to come to a really strong concept of exactly what people really valued about the riverfront and what we wanted to do to improve it and make it part of the heart of our downtown. So that plan is available online, and it has been the backbone of what the team that you'll see tonight has been working on. And some of those big ideas, really important things, were access to the river, green space, and open space. A lot of people felt like they couldn't get to the river, they couldn't touch it. Tying it economically to Main Street, to our downtown, making sure that there was strong access, green space, stormwater management, all of those things kind of tied together. So I will leave it at that. You are hopefully going to see the product of exactly that being put into place.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. So we took the work that Sarah did and her team with the master plan, and we then instituted a TIF, and this body blessed a TIF, and that is what we're using to actually implement this project here. And so oftentimes people hear us talk about TIF, they don't know or understand exactly what it is in just very brief terms. It's a municipal tool that is available to us where we capture the incremental value on taxes and we dedicate it to certain priorities, projects, whatever it may be within a district. And so we are using TIF financing to implement the project that's going to be discussed tonight. So with that being said, Greg, gonna just hand it off to you now to lead the discussion and talk about the work that we've done thus far. You're muted, Greg. Greg, you're muted.
I'm so embarrassed. I mean, you know how many Zoom calls we do every day, and to have that happen.
We know exactly how you feel.
as I was saying, I'd like to introduce the team members that we have tonight that will be presenting. And each of you guys can raise your hands. We have Bob Eulig from Halverson Design, who you may know already from the master planning efforts, along with Shannon Lane, who has been heavily involved since day one. And then on the VHB side, I've got Jeffrey Morrison Logan, who is an urban planner and landscape architect. And then myself, I'm the project manager with a civil engineering background. So I'll take you on a little tour. I want to try to share my screen. And hopefully you can all see that. Just an introductory slide to begin with. And I should also mention that we've been working with staff extensively, doing biweekly or weekly meetings as we've developed the conceptual design to provide the team with feedback and to try to get to the root of some of the issues. We've been doing a lot of due diligence, taking the early concepts from the master plan and making sure they are realizable, if that's a word, that there are no major flaws or faults, and carrying them forward into the design that we're going to show you tonight. I'll be taking you, or we will be taking you on a counterclockwise or a clockwise journey around the riverfront. And before we get there, maybe Bob, you can talk about the 6 ideas, or Shannon, the 6 ideas that came out of the master plan that Sarah just touched on.
Sure, I won't spend too much time because I know we have a lot to go through, but so the 6 big ideas relate to, first, number 1 is connectivity, both somewhat as Sarah mentioned, this idea of connectivity of downtown to the waterfront, but also adjacent neighborhoods to the waterfront, as well as once this is, once we've got a loop, the idea will be to connect it further to existing other open space amenities such as Mine Falls Park beyond the Broad Street Parkway. So that's one key element. Then environmental stewardship, we talked about some of that's already been implemented in terms of removing invasive species and trying to get native and indigenous plantings established along the riverfront. So that's beginning. We're also thinking about how we can reduce stormwater runoff, reduce impervious surfaces as we go through the project, and maybe introduce rain gardens and so forth to provide a more amenable environmental condition there. Along with that, number 3 is access to the river. We've talked, and in a lot of the master planning meetings, people were really excited about the idea of kind of improving the access to the river in a number of ways. One is visual access, so better eyesight to the water, and then physical access, more opportunities to get down to the water in more places. And people weren't just content about getting close to the water, but they liked the idea of actually being able to get it so close that they can dip their toes in it and maybe access it at various points. So we mean access to the water in a variety of places. Recreation and open space is the 4th one. So you'll see in a number of instances in which we're looking to create significant new open space access and open space opportunities and parks along the river's edge where people want to be. In the process, we want to look at flood resiliency and take that into consideration as an important part, as there's a big investment going into the riverfront improvements. And we want to make sure that those are consider that. And then lastly, there's some visions for changes that hopefully will occur associated with an improved access to the waterfront that will hopefully spur in additional investment and economic development along the riverfront, which is similar to what we've seen in other places where cities have taken great time and thought in investing in the waterfront. So those are kind of the 6 big ideas in a nutshell.
Thank you, Bob. And then this is just a graphic right out of the master plan that shows roughly 1/2 of the project, with Main Street on the right and Broad Street Parkway on the left. And it shows some of the conceptual improvements that were identified during the master plan, along both sides of the river. And then the next sheet shows the other half of the project, which is everything east of Main Street, all the way down to the Pan Am Bridge down by Temple Street. And again, with improvements and a continuous path all the way around the outside of the river. These are some visualizations that were generated during the master plan, and you'll see the current status of some of these improvements that we're now visualizing with current plans. This shows the north side of the river. Some of these concepts have been carried forward. In fact, most of them have been, and we'll show you all of that. So I mentioned we're going to take you on a tour starting, and I should say that we've broken the project down into currently about 17 bite-sized pieces. And we've done that because each of these little areas have their own unique concerns, constraints, and opportunities and goals and design aspects. So we may still build it all at once, but we found it very useful to break it down into smaller bite-sized pieces. So up in the left-hand side, left-hand number 1, is a proposed connection across Pine Street. It's just outside the picture, but provide improved pedestrian access to Mine Falls Park, so a connection up there. And then our tour is going to also show you what we're proposing behind Clock Tower Place, and then cross the river, follow the north side of the river all the way to Main Street, and then cross Main Street and follow the north side of the river by BAE in the parking lot, go down the Pan Am Bridge, and then go south side of the river behind the library, back to Main Street. And then ultimately, we're going to finish our tour at Parc de la Renaissance, which we envision as being one of the great opportunities to make massive improvements along the waterfront. So I'll let Shannon or Bob take over with some of the details of our tour.
Okay, so I'll start with the Factory Street extension that runs between Clock Tower Place and the river. And if you've wandered down there at all, you know it as essentially a wide expanse of asphalt that's kind of undifferentiated between the river's edge and the building, which you see in this existing conditions photo. And then before we go to the next photo, so you'll just to place yourself on the right-hand side, you can see the Water Street Viaduct and the parking for Clock Tower Place in the upper right-hand corner. So take note of that because that's the edge of Parc de la Renaissance there. Now, so this is a before image. And then next image, please. So the next image is like an after image about the vision that we're anticipating. So you'll notice up in the upper right-hand corner, the Parc de la Renaissance parking lot area is now green. So that's assuming Parc de la Renaissance has become fully parked between Water Street and the river's edge. And you can see kind of a river walk extension there and then walkway coming down. And so we've taken a little bit of liberties there at Clock Tower to reconfigure parking to allow that walkway to occur. And then it approaches what we call a shared use zone that goes between Clock Tower Place and kind of the Broad Street end, in which you can see is we've tried to reduce the amount of asphalt in that area to essentially what is required by both service vehicles and emergency access vehicles, about 15 feet of that entire zone. So that's what's kind of left in gray. And we're looking at creating amenities in the other remaining areas that occur. So now we're going to go from this view, we're going to kind of go down on the ground and show you kind of, now if you recall that this location behind Clock Tower on the right-hand side, you kind of see the dumpster for Clock Tower, one of several. In the background, you see the parking lot for Clock Tower Place and the railing to the river on the left-hand side. And then at the base of Clock Tower Place, there's a series of kind of brick arches that are just painted infills. And everything is kind of a hard surface. So this is the kind of existing condition. And so if we look at the next slide that shows you kind of that same kind of transformation. Oh, I forgot to mention this. So anyway, jumping ahead of myself, but anyway, some of the opportunities that we see associated with that spot was, number one is telling the history of Nashua, which was that previous image. There's opportunities for, how to tell history and heritage of Nashua. So that's something to bear in mind. Next image, sorry about that, is, thinking about the transition from when we're in totally vehicular areas to when we go in kind of shared areas. And so this slide on the upper left is kind of how we think about kind of giving vehicles the cues of, hey, you're entering a zone that's not all vehicular, you're sharing with pedestrians, so slow down. So that's that image. On the right-hand side is a few images of how we could think about putting enclosures around some of the utilities and trash and recycling to make them more visually discrete and maybe fit them in with the kind of vernacular that's there. So a couple thoughts there. Next slide, please. And so this is the jumping to the next slide. So some of the things we thought about is, again, if you narrow it down such that it's more the width of 15 feet, so it's a shared pedestrian and vehicular use, with vehicles really only using that are emergency or are service. You can see in the background that there's kind of a strip that's kind of a granite strip with 2 yellow bollards to kind of restrict day-to-day vehicular use there. Those bollards will be dropped down, so if emergency vehicles need to get in there, they can drop them down to get into the space. And then you'll note that, so we've maximized kind of softscape. All the areas that are to the either side of this 15-foot zone could be planted to make it more kind of more user-friendly for people running and jogging and walking along the riverfront. And then you can see off to the right is the example of kind of enclosing that trash receptacle, the trash dumpster in an enclosure, and then providing access such that there be swing gates to get access to it. And then we kind of took the liberty to say, well, wouldn't those arches kind of, one of the things we could think about is, having an artist collaboration where we pick certain images and maybe infill with clock towers collaboration, different images that kind of convey, again, history and heritage of Nashua into that base. So make it a dynamic and interesting riverfront.
We would also be replacing the existing railings and installing all new street lighting along the roadway there. So this image shows that path that Bob was talking about behind Clock Tower Place. It also shows the existing Cotton Transfer Bridge that has a switchback type ADA ramp on the south side. And we're proposing to create a similar ADA ramp on the north side, which is actually just one directional. It doesn't switch back because there's no room. But that would provide it would provide an ADA, publicly accessible ramp up to the Cotton Transfer Bridge. This is an image showing what it would look like against the 30 Front Street building, which we showed the building owner, and he was happy with that. Some of the conceptual designs for that ramp, just showing the type of slope that would be introduced. So then moving further east along the north side of the river, there's an existing 10-foot path that is fine as is. We may look at some other enhancements along the path, and there's one that we will be showing you shortly. And then a boardwalk in front of the Eversource substation, connecting across to a new paved path on the north side of the river. And then a boardwalk to raise the elevation of the path, to match a boardwalk that would be cantilevered off the side of 53 Main Street, similar to what is done already on the Peddler's Daughter building on the other side of Main Street, and then making that pedestrian connection to Main Street. Jeffrey, I don't know if you wanted to chime in on some of the work you did here.
Yeah, sure. I'll just dive in quickly here. So this is a three-dimensional view of the area that Greg just showed you. We have Main Street and the bridge off to the right-hand side of this drawing here. And it's just indicative of the work that the team has been working with members of the city staff over the last few months to try to understand some of the three-dimensional puzzle pieces, if you will, about how these different elements will come together. So on the left-hand side here, We have us coming around the bend from the Greeley House, which is off to the image to the left. We're actually tying in some of the grade that you see in that area, the topography in that area, to be able to get up onto the boardwalk that would be built out over top of the river. And as we come down around the bend there, as Greg's following around here, it would actually go back onto land and come around and head its way over towards Main Street via emerging yet again up onto a boardwalk system, cantilevered out in front of the building next to Main Street there as well. So I think what we found as we go through this next stage of our project, which is called design development, is that there's a lot of details that we're starting to figure out as a team. Things like how do the grades tie in? What would some of the materials be, for example? Where, if we have some of these floating docks and some of the ramps that would go down to the floating docks to get access, as Bob mentioned, to the riverfront, where could those be and how do we offer some flexibility? And then what's also important about these diagrams, we're dealing with an item called compensatory storage, where when the river floods and it requires the capacity to be able to have that flood water go to different locations, how do we make sure that we're not filling into that capacity and hence creating a problem versus carving out and giving more room for that water to flow? So when we get to the end of our tour over to the Parc de la Renaissance, we'll talk about some areas that we might need to fill in to get some really dramatic effect going in the design. But over the left-hand side here, we're starting to explore the idea over by the Eversource substation, what if we need to carve out and terrace some of this land and offer a different unique experience for the users in that area as well? So a little bit of a three-dimensional puzzle, but I think at the end of the day, when you think about the experience as you're going through along the river corridor, there's a lot of great things that you can experience as a pedestrian and getting access in very different ways and dramatic views at the same time. You want to go to the next one, Greg? Okay. So here we have a view that we've turned around, looking back at the substation. We're seeing back towards the part of the riverfront here. And then Shannon, you want to talk a little bit about the design, about the before and after in this area? Do you want to go to the next slide, Greg?
I was going to talk about this and let Shannon talk about the Renaissance.
Great. Thanks, Bob.
It's no problem. So this is again a view looking the other direction from what Jeffrey just spoke to you about, looking at the substation. One of the things that, just to reiterate, is given the offsets from the substation, it wasn't viable for us to put the walkway kind of on the land. So we've hence looked at a boardwalk solution that's over water. And then to complement that, we've been talking about this with the city about ways of mitigating visually some of the substation. We can't, it would be quite a task to mitigate visually the whole thing, given how high some of the overhead wires and so forth. But we focused on a couple of ideas that could kind of, visually distract you from the amount of infrastructure kind of at the lower level. So the next couple of images kind of take you through a little bit of a design study of what we looked at. So here's three different kind of what we call design precedents. So they're just to give you an idea of kind of what if we use this kind of material and medium and kind of try to implement it as in these solutions. So here's three different solutions and you'll see how we kind of implement each of those on the site. So next image, please. So then this first one is kind of using what we'll call Corten steel. They're kind of, rust, they kind of oxidize steel panels that would be set apart. And then in between that would be landscaping. So that it would be both a kind of a hard vertical element and then a soft element in between it, so that it kind of, and these panels would be set kind of in a random yet staggered pattern to kind of visually obscure the substation behind you and kind of distract your eye from focusing on it. So that's one scenario. The next scenario was one of which it was more kind of literal, where it wraps as a continuous screen, and again was an opportunity to kind of introduce some graphic images, some artful images into it, and wrap the sides other than the parking lot side to screen that lower level elements. And then the third image was of a little bit more kind of tall and slender elements, again, set kind of randomly, but yet set at a pattern in which they kind of create visual obstruction of the substation. And when we looked at these and we kind of ran it by the team and the city and so forth, everybody thus far has kind of been in favor of kind of the first scheme in terms of how that combination of kind of soft and hard aesthetic kind of work together, and the kind of, the warm color of the Corten steel. So that's just in terms of where we've been and where we're thinking of heading. So keep that in mind as you think about input on that.
So then if you were at the substation looking across the river, you would be looking at this building, which is the 4 Water Street building. And in this image, Parc de la Renaissance would be off to your right. And then Bicentennial Park would be off to your left with Main Street in the background. So the way we're proposing to connect the trail is similar again to the Peddler's Daughter, is to have a structure come across a raised boardwalk that would be roughly 10 feet in width on the surface. This is just a rendering of what that would look like from across the river. These single piles would be roughly 25 feet apart and may not be as visible as shown here because they'd be mostly in the shade underneath the structure. And we have met with the building owners where we're proposing boardwalks like this, and they've been very receptive to the idea. Now we get up to Main Street and we cross and we follow an existing 8-foot wide path from Peddler's Daughter past Margarita's, which is just outside of this picture here on the left. And this is the BAE parking lot in this image on the top side, on the north side of the river. Our proposal is to construct a 10-foot wide paved path along the top of the riverbank, adjacent to the paved BAE parking lot, and then connect all the way down where there's an existing sidewalk across the river on the Pan Am Railroad Bridge. Down in this lower right-hand corner, there's a little bit of city-owned land which can form a really nice little park, which Jeffrey will show you in a second. This is a view looking to the west on that top of bank. If you've never been there, it looks a lot different than it used to. There used to be trees, and it was more less visible than it is today. And the same thing on the other side of the river. But this is a Jersey barrier that confines the parking lot, the BAE parking lot. And then Jeffrey and his team came up with this image of what it could look like. Jeffrey, I don't know if you want to take these next couple slides.
Yeah, sure. I think the idea, it's pretty obvious when you see it here that when you think about what's out there today and the amount of access and this as a edge that you can traverse and parallel along the river here, it's pretty dramatic about opening up these views and having it as a real amenity. So I think some of the objectives here and requirements are putting in the railing because of the steep slopes that go down to the river off to the left-hand side. You can also look across the riverbank to the other side. There's going to be a parallel trail that will come all the way back up towards the falls. And because we're trying to work really closely in the width that we have in both of these areas, the details quickly start to matter in terms of the railing details. We'll probably find ways of softening that up by introducing some other elements along the way, maybe some placards or some informational things about the history, but off to the right-hand side being a nice transition and a buffer to the parking lot there. And thinking about street lighting and some of the landscape edges, but limited cross-section, but I think pretty powerful in terms of opening up the access and what it means in terms of an amenity that'll benefit a lot of people in this area as well. So from here, we're going to do a 180-degree turnaround, and we're going to look down towards where the Pan Am Bridge is right now. And if you look carefully at this existing photo, you can see where pedestrians can walk across that bridge today. It's a pretty narrow crossing that's over there, and you can see the two sides and the banks of the river here where there's the trails that exist out here today. And what was interesting, this is one of many places throughout the entire study area that with some very targeted improvements in celebrating some of these dramatic views that I keep saying here, there can really be a nice series of places that get created here. And even while this might be a smaller one, I think it'd be equally powerful. So Greg, if you go to the next slide, you can see here, again, by the introduction of some simple benches, some lighting, getting folks up to the water's edge, providing that critical buffer and the railing edges there as well, introducing some landscape and maybe some planter beds off to the left-hand side. And then with some of the planting and maintenance that's going to happen of the river banks on both sides, and maybe some targeted planting across on the other side, that really can start to open up those views and talk about the history. And if you notice along the bridge itself, we're contemplating replacing some of the flooring that's out there and some of the railing, really to tie in aesthetically the theming that would happen to bring this entire environment together. a pretty
It's really
dramatic
quite
view.
a dramatic spot. You can actually hear the river rushing there. It's pretty nice.
Right. So Greg, hand it back to you.
Thank you. So from, once we've crossed the river on the pedestrian bridge, we would envision another 10-foot wide paved path with railings, benched in. There's a natural bench there already that we would just be paving. As we head further west, there's an existing ADA ramp behind the library to make up grade from the top of the falls to below the falls. And that ADA ramp is only 4.5 feet wide. And we really want this to be a multi-use facility. So the game plan is to widen it to 10 feet, to actually replace it, to be able to do that. Heading further west, another 10-foot path along the river to another ADA ramp to get up to grade of Main Street, and then attaching another boardwalk to the 60 Main Street building to connect to Main Street. This image shows that existing ADA ramp behind the library. It's in good shape, but it's narrow and not the greatest looking spot. And this just shows how it could be embellished, replacing that ramp in its entirety with a 10-foot wide ramp, having a little lookout spot below it so you can observe the falls. And then finally, once we get to Main Street, there's Bicentennial Park, which is just out of this original image from the master plan. And then down to, like I said earlier, one of the jewels of the project, Parc de la Renaissance. And from here, Shannon, if you want to take over.
Thanks, Greg. So if you all recall, this is where we left off in the master plan, kind of just coming up with general forms and figures and kind of overall spatial definition, circulation. And then Greg, if you flip to the next slide, please. So from there, and Greg, feel free to kind of blast through these. I know that there's quite a few slides. So from the master plan, we started to look at some scale comparisons. So we took, this is an aerial of Parc de la Renaissance, and we did a few, if you want to just flip through. So this is Atlantic Wharf in Boston and how the size of Parc de la Renaissance compares. Next. Nashua Street Park, another one of our parks in Boston, and how, again, Parc de la Renaissance compares. So we're starting to kind of hone in on parks of very comparable size, parks that have similar character and use, adjacency to rivers and bodies of water, to try to start to really define that character and determine, what it is that we can actually fit in this space that we have. Next, please. We also started to look at various precedent images and examples of character and use and texture and material that could occur in our park in Nashua. So a couple of examples here, the Chattanooga waterfront, Clippership Wharf in East Boston, which is one of our projects that we're super proud of. Next, please. Other kind of park, just feeling images, textures and uses and events, lunchtime performance areas and quiet places that people can just enjoy themselves and get out and enjoy nature. Next. And then we also, one of the main features in the park will be a central performance or pavilion structure. So we started to look at various examples of what that structure may look like. Some of these are structures that we have in other parks that we've designed, and others are just inspirational. So Greg, feel free to flip through these. And then also just starting to look at other parks around the country and the world, and starting to develop the overall geometries and circulation and breakdown of hard versus soft. I think we've all kind of landed on this kind of circuitous and more organic forms. We've done a few studies that looked at more linear orthogonal forms, and then more studies that involve these kind of organic and rounded shapes. And I think through many discussions with city staff and the team, we've all kind of landed on this more organic form that starts to really take on some of the natural forms and features that we have at our river's edge. So this was the last few slides that Greg just flipped through were just kind of the concept as it started to evolve. And then we've gotten to this concept that you have on the screen right now, which is a slightly more evolved plan than the master plan. So you can start to see that central performance structure and grand oval lawn, followed by planted terraces that may have stepped granite walls with bench tops that make up the grade change that's about 6 to 8 feet down from the top of Riverbank up to Water Street. So kind of mitigating that grade change and also providing a natural amphitheater for people to find seating and look out over the water, as well as natural seating for the amphitheater and performance structure.
You should mention Water Street too, Shannon.
Oh, certainly. Yep. So Water Street is currently two-way traffic. So we would be exploring changing Water Street to be one-way traffics that would enter from Main Street and that would exit onto Factory. And so the first portion of Water Street, we'd like to explore maximizing the space that we have by providing 45 or 30-degree angled parking. And then as the road slightly narrows, we would move to parallel parking up to Factory Street. And we're also exploring adding some additional spaces that we may lose down in Park de la Renaissance currently onto Factory Street, which is slightly off the page, slightly off the bottom of the page right now.
Thank you.
And if we move down to pedestrian level view down in Park de la Renaissance as it currently in its current condition, this is the image that you see currently on the screen. And then this is a visualization of the character and look and feel that the park may take on. And these are just some additional images of parks that Halverson and VHB have both completed, that many of which we visited together as a team last summer and started to kind of collect different ideas, materials, uses. It's always fun to revisit your own parks and see how people use them, see what materials and elements have been successful and what have not, because you can always learn from your prior work. So we found that to be really helpful, and we really enjoyed going on this tour. We had Tim and Sarah and the mayor with us as well, so it was a great experience.
And that's the tour. Could I go back to one slide? We didn't really talk about Bicentennial Park. Sure. The smaller of the two, but certainly has a lot of potential. And although it's a fine little park on its own today, there's opportunities to maybe make it a little better, but also to address some ADA issues. The sidewalk that comes down towards Fort Water Street exceeds allowable grades. So Shannon has come up with an idea to introduce a curving sidewalk through there that would provide the accessible route, while also maybe redefining some of the spaces in the park. This also shows the boardwalk along Fort Water Street and how it connects to Renaissance Park. This snapshot just shows everything all in one image. You can see how extensive it is. It's almost a mile from end to end. Very ambitious project. And as Tim said, we're designing to a budget. So hopefully we're able to realize all of the improvements that we've just shown you. And we'll know more in the next phase of design as we get more detailed and we'll have actual topographic survey to work with, and we'll get into some more finite design elements. But that's the end of our presentation. Would love to, I guess, get feedback and hear your responses.
Well, thank you, Greg, for that presentation. It was good. I'll open it up to members of the committee for questions. I haven't got everybody up on the screen, so just speak your name and I'll recognize you. Tom, you're recognized. Alderman Lopez.
So two things. I noticed you have a little Eye of Dantos there designed for the French Park thing. And that looks like it would be a band shell that's pointed more towards Main Street. But the gradient for the ground that you'd be putting that on is pretty steep. Like it drops into the river. It looks like you could reclaim a little bit of the space by changing the way the parking is, but is that going to take a lot of fill and like a retaining wall? Is that a major construction project?
Yes and yes. The way it's currently drawn, we would be bringing fill in against the retaining wall of Water Street, and as well as bumping out into the river a little bit. We're not sure yet how that will occur, whether it's going to be on pile supports or whether it will be actually filled with a retaining wall. But we're definitely squeezed a little bit widthwise. But the idea is to, if we bump out here, maybe we have to bump in somewhere else to make up for that flood storage. And as Jeffrey pointed out, we're going to introduce flood storage on the other side of the river to make up for some of this.
And then my second question was those big murals along the retaining wall, I guess, that holds up Water Street.
Yep.
I was the one who painted most of them. I'm not really like super attached to them because we knew that likely would not live there forever. And when we were doing it, we noticed that there's a lot of damage to that wall, actually. Like there's spots that are pushing out, there's spots that are leaking. There's actually an American flag mural on the other side, which the lines used to be straight, and you can literally look at them sideways and see where the cement is pushing out. Are there plans to rebuild or revitalize that spot since we're going to be working in the park anyway?
We have not planned on that yet. And one thing we're planning is to fill up against that wall. Not all of it and not to the top everywhere, but some of that fill will help stabilize. But certainly the maintenance and repair of that wall is outside of the scope of the Riverfront project.
Okay, just because I'd hate for you to build a really nice park and then they have to dig it up in order to fix that.
Yeah, it's a great observation, and it's something we should probably look into a little more deeply.
That's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Lopez. Anybody else? Speak up. I can't see everybody on the screen. Seeing none. Yes, speak up.
Rick?
Alderman Dow.
Yeah, I just have one question. As you were going through, you're showing where they took down all the invasive species, and some of those hadn't been touched so long that they're 6 and 8 inch stumps. That area looks, like they just had a thunderburst go through there. And do we know what the plan is in the near term to get the stumps out of there and at least level the ground? And
we're actively working on it now. There's actually landscapers that have been out there for the last 2 weeks, continuing to do debris cleanup from the tree removal that occurred earlier this year.
Sounds good.
They're also adding some loam and seeding to that area.
The other question I have is that hill on the side where the senior center is, I could be wrong, but is there asbestos buried there? So you have to be a little careful when you're digging.
Yeah, Tim already tipped us off. We're very much, aware and considering what to do there. We're going to try to minimize excavation, obviously, and building a path over that land will actually help encapsulate it.
Yeah, it would also be a nice idea to have an observation place up by the senior center so they could look out over the river once it's all fixed up.
Yeah, good point.
not
That's a
put
great point.
trees and bushes so they can't see the river. And you can't make a trail down to the walkway because it's too steep for the seniors, but
Right.
you could have a place that they could, sit and look out at the new environment.
Thank you.
Right.
I guess one other quick question. The trees that are existing now alongside the apartments on
Yep,
the
Clock
river,
Tower.
Clock
Mhm.
Tower, are those in your plan? Are those staying, or are you going to actually put trees that look a lot better than those do?
Yeah, we would love to, but those trees are deeply rooted in the stone wall along the edge of the river. And the advice we've received is don't touch them because taking the trees out could compromise the wall.
Yeah, at least we might trim them up, make them look better.
Yeah, yep.
Okay, thank you, Alderman Dowd. Anybody else with a question?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman?
We got Alderman Lou first.
Okay, thank you.
No.
And these may be basic, but reference to the master plan. Are you talking about the City of Nashua master plan or a master plan that references this particular project?
Yes, it was a specific to the riverfront.
Okay, thank you. And just a terminology that I wasn't clear on is when you say that you're building to a budget, what do you mean when you say that?
It means we have we have a fixed amount of money that's available under the TIF, so that we know that that's our limit, and we're designing. We're being cautious so that we don't over design and design something that can't be built within that budget.
So what you're presenting is somewhat within the budget of the TIF.
Right.
Great. And just one other question is, there was a view that a couple of the presenters seemed to think was very attractive. And was that facing the Casimir, St. Casimir? Was that facing the church that's on Temple Street? Or?
Are you talking down by the river, down by the railroad bridge?
Pan Am Bridge.
Pan Am, yep. Okay. Let me go to that.
I mean, you folks may not know what the name of that church is, but.
In the background here?
Yeah, is that what that is?
I guess I don't. I don't know.
Yes, this is Sarah. Yes, that's it.
Okay.
That's correct.
All right. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Lou. There was somebody else?
Yes,
Can you identify yourself, please?
Alderman Jettie.
Alderman Jettie, please.
So, this is, giving me a view that, is really, it's opened my eyes to how wonderful the riverfront in this area can look, after this project is completed. I noticed, as soon as the trees got removed, it looked, my first reaction was, my gosh, it looked like a bomb had been set off. But the more that I get used to it, the more I see the river, and it's opened up a view of the river that is much better than it used to be. And, I noticed that, that there's a business that has been starting to rent kayaks over on the north side of the river, in front of Lofts 34. And it just shows how much, what an asset this, the Nashua River can be to the city. But my concern is, as we make these improvements, like behind Clock Tower, over the Cotton Transfer Bridge, the boardwalk on the north side of the river, and the floating docks that you mentioned. I wonder, has parking been considered? Because as people want to take advantage of these great new opportunities, will they have a place to park? Will they have a place to access the river? Have you considered that and taken that into consideration?
I would say not to any great degree. The feeling is that you can access the river from many different locations, and that there is parking around the area, but we haven't designated anything, close in just for this. There's mostly private lots around it, like on the north side, the Brady Sullivan property and the Stabile property. Those are all private, with a few public spaces, I believe. So, but up on Main Street, obviously, people can come right down but yeah, we haven't gone to any great study, I would say.
I would just say that, when we studied the master plan with Tim and Sarah, we did identify kind of upriver from Water Street and over by the library, some additional opportunities where additional structured parking could be looked at. So I think while we weren't able to solve it within the scope of what we were looking at, we were keeping an eye on and kind of thinking about next steps to address those kind of issues that you raised, sir.
And this is Jeffrey. I think the only other thing I'd add is that, like many great cities, not too dissimilar from Nashua, investing in their downtowns and into their waterfronts and their open space and thinking about the livability aspects, the walkability aspects of it. It's a very highly walkable area. And I think when you imagine that people that already would be coming downtown, it gives them many other reasons to stay longer. So those that might be doing retail shopping, it's a short walk away to the riverfront. Those that might be walking, that might come out for a walk once around the riverfront for their lunch break, for example. So the idea that it's, I think, a pretty great investment next to a highly walkable area of other things that are going on seem to make some sense as well. But it's a very good thought about how to, supporting that investment with further accessibility as well.
I just think that, if you're going to have floating docks, I assume the intention of the floating docks is to provide, boat access, kayak access, canoe access.
Mm-hmm.
And, people aren't going to be able to walk those things down to that area. They're going to have to transport them. And I know that behind, on the north side of the river, there is a parking lot there behind the Riverside, what used to be the Riverside barbecue property, and the Main Street church on the corner of Franklin and Main. I don't know if there's an opportunity to make some kind of an arrangement with the property owners that own that property, whether there's an opportunity there for the city to acquire some parking to provide access for people who would want to access the river with kayaks or canoes. Just something I want to bring up, and I'm hoping that that directors Cummings and Marchand are thinking along those terms.
Yes, Alderman Jetty, if I may, we are, and we hear you, and it's definitely something that's in the back of our mind in terms of how we can be very strategic in terms of making those investments and where and when and how, so it fits in overall with the plan.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Jetty. Anybody else with a comment or question?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question, Chairman.
Yes, Alderman Schmidt.
Thank you. I understand you have to wait for the money to come in before you can start anything on this, but do you have a schedule of when you would like to what you would like to do next. It would be very interesting to see if you're going to make it a linear decision. Do you start in one place and move on from there? Or if you
Greg?
There you go. Thank you.
Yes. So we have an ambitious schedule. We want to be in construction this time next year. We want to have shovels in the ground, if not sooner. And we've always thought that there may be certain aspects of the project that could be accelerated because they're very straightforward and get them out on the street quicker. But we also, we want to look at the big picture and see what's the most efficient. What delivery vehicle do we want to use? Either this conventional design it, bid it, build it, or bringing in construction manager, which we're having those discussions right now. There you can see that there's different types of construction. There's structures, there's boardwalks and bridge components versus paths and landscaping and that sort of thing. So it may be broken up in a couple of different ways like that with unique contractor types. But to answer your first question, though, the schedule is we want to get this thing going.
So I'm going to take a moment and opine a little bit further because this has been a big point of mine, and I appreciate the question. The ideal scenario, and I don't know if we'll hit some of these marks, but what I've expressed to the team is concept plan wrapping up now. We'll go into preliminary design through the early fall. I'd like to continue with final design through late fall, early winter, get it out, bid it, and ideally start construction for next spring. There's a lot of work to be done to make that timeline, including having this body here appropriate the bond. So I'll be coming back to you at various points to have further design conversations, but one of the pretty critical elements to moving this project forward is having bond authorization in place probably sometime in November, that type of time frame, maybe October, November. So we continue with the design, have money to do that design work, and then have the money to do the construction. So this is just the first phase of us having this conversation with you. I'll be coming back before you in short order to look for approval of a contract for preliminary design, engineering work, which will further study this area and put it into better details, and then a final design contract. And that final design contract would come most likely after the bond authorization. That final design contract would be in a November, December type time period. That's the goal. Those are the goals that we're working on right now.
Thank you, Mr. Cummings. Any other questions by members of the committees?
If I could, Mr. Chairman, Alderman Jettie here.
Yes, Alderman Jettie.
So to Director Cummings, is this money, when you're talking about a bond, are we talking money in addition to money that's going to come from the TIF, this area, I'm forgetting what TIF means, but
tax increment finance. And to answer your question, no. What we need is authorization to use the TIF dollars in a way that allows us to borrow the money and use the TIF dollars to service the principal and the interest, to service the debt.
Okay, but so the actual payment on principal of the bond would come.
We'll use TIF funds.
So I'm sorry. So would the TIF funds pay the principal or just the interest on the bond?
Both.
Okay, and so So the rest of the taxpayers outside the TIF would not be paying for this?
Correct. Did you hear me? Correct.
No, I didn't hear you. So you said correct? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I just have a follow-up question.
Hold on for a second. Alderman Jettie, are you finished?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay, Alderman Lou.
Thank you. My follow-up was when I had asked you about what it means to design to a budget. I realized I wonder if you could tell me what is the budget?
Well, the number we're working with, and I can't tell you that this is what it's going to, come in at, but we're looking at a $15 million, $15.5 million bond.
Okay.
All set, Alderman Lowe?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other further questions from my members of the committees?
Mr. Chairman, to Dave Tenza.
Yes, Chairman Tenza.
Thank you. So if I could just make a comment first regarding the first slide with the goals of the Riverfront Master Development Master Plan. I'm not sure if they were set 1 to 6 in priority of what everyone thinks is most important to least important, but in my humble opinion, I think the most important thing about it is the recreation and green space. Especially east of the river. I think that the east side of the river right now has more of a reputation. I think there's actually less foot traffic down there. And I think it would be great to have some element that draws people down along the entire plan, the entire route, because it's a fantastic plan. I think that the plan to open things up on the east side of the river will be very helpful. But I'll also just kind of mention that we have a fantastic arts community here in Nashua. We do the sculpture symposium every year, and I'm wondering if we can incorporate some of the local groups that are already doing good work in Nashua into this plan. In order to enhance it even more, or some type of activity along the river that either relates to the history of Nashua or something that families can go down there and do to maybe attract people, on weekends and nights and in good weather like we have today. So hopefully that can be talked about and discussed and incorporated going forward. And then my only other question for, I think it's probably for Director Cummings, but maybe for members of the design team, is that as far as economic development is concerned, where do you see the, potential spots for economic development along the riverfront? And what type of development do you think would be most likely to come into this area? Would it be residential or commercial or retail or restaurants?
Thank you, Chairman Tenza. So just to go back to your comments that you just made a few moments ago, I completely agree with you. In fact, the east side of the river, I think until the trees came down, I bet a lot of people didn't even realize there was such an extensive trail over there that connected the east side of the river on the south side. It was definitely a hidden gem that once the vegetation got peeled back a little bit, people actually saw what was already there, and it's good bones to work with. And I think we need to just continue to enhance upon it. And doing some of the things that you just suggested is absolutely something that this group will further explore. I know it's been in the back of a few folks' minds to try to figure out how to install some art along the Riverwalk in certain places. And you bring up a good point about the recreation. And as you were talking about that, I was thinking, is there a way to do something to incorporate some recreation along that side of the riverfront? So I'll take that back to the design team and see if there's the width, the real estate to be able to do anything along there. but it would be interesting to incorporate some of those types of elements to continue the active use of the trail. Switching gears relative to economic development, there are a few sites that I would characterize as priority development sites along the river's edge. Just very quickly, a site that is on the west side, typically referred to as the Picker Artist Building. That's a building along with what is commonly referred to as Judge Gauthier's building, all now owned by Gately and referred to as the Gately Building. These are former mills on the west side. Those are sites that could be developed. Across from that, there's a pad development site that we've been in active conversations with a local developer, John Stabile, about developing on his pad site next to Cotton Mill. On the west side, there's a parking lot that is privately owned that there's a developer who's interested in developing on his parking lot that abuts the river. That's behind Main Street. So those are just a few sites that we know that this project is actually being the catalyst for conversations that's actually occurring right now. I've had 2 of them in the last 6 to 8 weeks. Where some of the local ownership is seeing what we're doing because they've been involved in the conversations now for the last 6 or so months, and they're thinking about how they can improve their properties. And so there's still more to come on that. I think to answer your question on use, it will definitely be a mixed use to predominantly residential, very minor retail or restaurant type of uses would be used at this time. The market really isn't there yet for that. What you're going to see is first come in through the door, and I would recommend this. 1, Nashua needs more housing, but 2, retail follows rooftops, and so we need more of that residential development to support maybe some of that retail and amenity type of uses that folks might want to see. So hopefully that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
Alderman O'Brien?
Yes, Alderman Lopez.
So I just have a couple comments from watching the other, that came up during the other questions that were being asked. I do want to respectfully disagree with the assessment this was a hidden gem on the east side, because I have used that path a lot. And I would say from my personal observation, it's as well used as the rail trail is, but it's used by people who live in the immediate area that may be, patrons of the senior center or may live in the Cottage Street area. They were pretty vocal when we took down the trees. So I know that a lot of people noticed that. I think that the library being closed over the summer due to the COVID-19 and the lockdown have suppressed a little bit of that other traffic from further away. But I think a lot of people appreciate that area, and I would just caution that we should make sure that the neighbors in the immediate vicinity are fully in line with this plan, which I believe is already being done. I know Director Marchant's done a lot of outreach in the area, and she has signs that you can scan and go to a website so that they can find out what's going on. When I was painting another mural, yet another mural, over at French Park over the weekend, all the veterans were asking me when they're taking down the Water Street Bridge and all that kind of stuff. So there's definitely a lot of local attention to this and a lot of people that are invested. So that's a good thing, and I think that's a strength of it. What I do want to be cautious of is I hope we can make a really strong argument for investing the 15 million. I mean, we just 2 weeks ago, we went through, with some serious concerns about revenue coming in. And some of us voted against the firefighters contract because we were concerned about being able to fund it in the future. And while I know that the TIF district is likely to pay for most of this, and I know that the bonding is an option, there's still going to be an impact on the city's ledger. The money is still going to be coming from somewhere. There's still going to be more need for maintenance or more of Director Cummings' time being spent on this. And I'm conscious of the risk that we are already facing with the Performing Arts Center being a little bit ahead of its time. And now we're looking at putting housing in there to expand the value given to that and say, okay, well, we have more people living downtown. So then they'll also patronize things like Performing Arts Center. And I can see how these systems will all work together. But I think we need to make sure that we're clearly presenting that to the public, and we're not just moving forward in a project where there isn't enough public investment that it turns into a big political quagmire. Because with the Performing Arts Center, I think we've been extremely distracted by the politics of it because we weren't able to maintain enough open communication and engagement as opposed to just announcing things, presenting things, and telling how it would be. So that's just my concerns about moving forward. Is this has a pretty big price tag. It's similar in dollar amounts to the Performing Arts Center. So I just hate to spend the next 3 years watching a perfectly good project get beaten over the head by people who have some information but not all of it. And there aren't champions that are like, I live right here and I'm very excited about this. I think we can do that a little bit differently for this project.
Thank you, Alderman Lopez.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Yeah, I have a question. I asked it before when the master plan was developed, and I got a good answer. And that is that the maintenance of the project will be covered under the TIF. And because the city has a weak history in taking care of its infrastructure, and I want to be sure that we have the funds, because it looks very nice and be great when it's finished, but if we don't keep it up, it'll suffer very quickly. But the only other question I have is, and I don't think we heard it before, is who in the city is going to be responsible for doing that maintenance? And I know that the costs will be covered under the TIF, but if it's any particular department, are they going to need more people to be able to support it? And have we looked into that? So I just think it's part of the plan that needs to be brought forward.
Sure, if I may, Mr. Chairman. So no, to answer your question, there will be no bringing in additional people. The TIF, for better or for worse, falls under economic development. So it would be under the purview of the Economic Development Office. And from day one, it was very clear that the maintenance of this project would be done through the TIF funds, not through the general fund, but through the TIF dollars. And it is planned to be done through a private contract with a landscaping type company, a management firm. That has been the plan since day one. That continues to be the plan. And yeah, I think your point is very well taken. We can add an addendum to this so it memorializes what I'm saying here. So it's very clear going forward that this is what the plan is for how we're going to handle the maintenance of it, of this infrastructure investment. But it hasn't changed from what we originally talked about back in 2017.
And having been in logistics for 4 years, when we're doing the design, it's a good idea to try and make all the parts of it as easy to maintain as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alderman Dowd. Anybody else on the committee with any further questions? Seeing none, I would like to thank Director Cummings and his team, the design team. I'd like to thank Mr. Bakels and his team for giving us a very good presentation. I like some of the things that we see here. I think it will enhance the national experience. So I thank you for your work and thank you for your presentation to the committee.
Well, thanks for having us.
Thank you. And I am going to ask that Director Cummings, you did offer if you could stick around. Part of my battle plan is to get through our meeting. And I think at the point of general discussion, we'll bring up, we'll focus a general discussion on some of the things with Director Cummings. So if we can move forward with that, we shall. I'll ask the clerk, do we have any correspondence?
We do from Tim Cummings, Economic Development Director. Providing PEDC members with status update on NMTC efforts.
Okay, there being no objection, I will accept the communication, place it on file, and I will give the opportunity at the point in the meeting of general discussion for Director Cummins to answer questions on the correspondence. Unfinished business,
We have none.
new business resolutions,
None.
new business ordinances.
None again.
Table and committee, we have two bills, 020-004, 020-006. They're still being looked at, and unless there is a motion, I would like to see them remain on the table. Seeing no motion, without objection, we'll keep those two bills on the table. General discussion. Director Cummings, I will invite you first.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just a couple items. I thought it may be a good time to just touch base on a couple hot button items that, if it's the pleasure of this group, we can continue moving along with some of them. The first one I wanted to raise was overnight parking. So over the last few weeks, a few members of the Board of Aldermen have approached me about overnight parking and whether we can move forward with a discussion about overnight parking citywide. What would that look like? How could we do it? This is not a new topic, and this was something that we were going to discuss at length with the parking study. And just to give you a quick update on the parking study, it's something that we could start now, but the data wouldn't be as valuable or as accurate. And so we could do some things now, but we wouldn't have it wrapped up in a 6-month time span. It would be more like if the data came in accurately, something like a year and a half from now. And I haven't gotten the sense that anyone wants to really move forward with that project under that type of timeline. That would be a long project to undertake. So we continue to hold. So knowing that, I reached out to the consultant who we have contracted to do our parking study and asked him for a quote for just to take on the overnight parking topic. And actually today they provided me with the scope of work, which I'm going to bring up on my screen here. If I can see if I can find it. Bear with me for a moment. Just hold on one second. I'm having a little technical difficulties here. There we go. So, I just shared my screen. So the Desmond, our parking consultant, offered to basically perform for us over, the next few months. And the reason why I raised this question to you all is it would be predominantly virtual. And I want to make sure that this group is comfortable with having such a public conversation virtually. We'll do the best that we can for citizen engagement. And I'm happy to take this project on. But nonetheless, it's not a traditional way of trying to adopt, new type of public policy, and certainly a very sensitive and political issue as parking tends to be. So with that being said, though, the scope of work is to review the current policies and regulations regarding residential parking within the city. Desmond will research parking industry best practices regarding permit parking managed by municipalities. There'll be a presentation to the Board of Aldermen, which I assume would be a PEDC/infrastructure type of conversation at the least, and at the most, full Board of Aldermen. Talk about the pros and cons of allowing on-street overnight parking within the municipality citywide. Certain trade-offs, such as, trash collection, snow removal, you know, various safety concerns that may be raised, and, you know, whether the city really wants to go down that path. Conduct a survey citywide relative to on-street overnight parking. Desmond would provide supportive material to my office and to basically me, and this is something I wanted to raise to the group to see if there was an interest. And then I'm suggesting that we would do 9 ward meetings, which I would be turning to the Board of Aldermen and to the members to help facilitate those 9 meetings, because I don't pretend to believe I know those, you know, the 9 wards as well as any one of you may do. But nonetheless, to have real neighborhood specific type conversations. That would then feed back to the larger conversation overall. So then Desmond would do some research based on some of the communities that, you know, are outlined here. You know, Manchester, Concord, Portland, Maine, Westford, Connecticut, Albany, New York, Ann Arbor, Michigan, Concord, North Carolina, Rochester, Minnesota, Meridian, Indiana, Idaho, Somerville, Massachusetts, and Lowell, Massachusetts. These were recommendations from Desmond as to where we should look to as guideposts. And then ultimately, Desmond would work with us in developing, you know, whether this is something that we would want to implement and provide some recommendations to us. Then have a public discussion with us again with this type of body, ultimately ending in you know, probably a piece of legislation that would get drafted to introduce, I could only suspect, overnight parking, and how and when and what shape that may be is all still to be determined. The cost for this would be $6,000. I want to note this would never go before Finance Committee. So I really just wanted to take the opportunity here now to have a conversation with the group as to, do we want to proceed down this path? I'm happy to do it. I know I've had, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here so folks can kind of see each other more regularly. But I know folks have raised this question to me individually and have expressed concerns about overnight parking, lack thereof, how it's being done. Frustration that we're doing one-offs, you know, one street here, one street there. But then ultimately, I've heard from a lot of members of the Board of Aldermen who say that they're not fans of overnight parking. They would like to keep it as is. So I wanted to get some guidance from you all as to whether this is something that you wanted to pursue. We would do it, you know, immediately if it's something that this body wanted to continue having a conversation on. So, Mr. Chair, this is one of the items I wanted to talk in detail about. I'm sure that there's others, but I can stop now if you'd like for a conversation on this.
No, I would thank you, Director Cummings. And while we have Director Marsh on here, I think this is both germane to both the divisions. Part of, and if I may ask the first question, part of the root of the problem is because many of our downtown infrastructure, our homes, were originally 2.5-story, 2-family homes. But many people have adapted and changed these into apartments. Yet, the linear parking space in front of the structure hasn't grown. And so I know we do try to figure out. And one thing in the very quick overview that I saw in Desmond's proposal, will it also look at our current ordinances and make recommendations to kind of help us deal with some of the apartments, and maybe we shouldn't be putting some apartments in some areas if we haven't got the park. Did you get that? Hello?
Just to be clear, Mr. Chairman, are you speaking to me or to Director Marchand?
Well, I threw it out there for the both because I think the question is germane to both divisions.
So I'll take the lead here, and I'm sure Director Marchand will have her own comments. I don't think it's lost on me, and I've made it a point of of pointing out to the community development team that there's a disconnect between our parking regulations and our land use regulations. I would not go far as to say we should be prohibiting residential uses. I think we need housing, so long as it's appropriate for the neighborhood. But what we have right now is a disconnect in terms of how we accommodate parking. And we need to have a conversation, and whether we have the conversation through parking, through that lens, or through the lens of land use, it's ultimately a question that this body needs to answer as to what do you want to be? Who do you want to be in terms of the city of Nashua? And so this is probably one start of a larger conversation that I know Director Marchand will get into when it comes to the master plan citywide. But having a solution in place from an economic development perspective is really what I'm concerned with. I want to make sure that we have something tangible to give residents, to give developers, to give consumers here in Nashua. So when they do bump up against this issue, and they have, that's the issue, is that we then have a good plan in place and how we address it. That's at least that's been my thought process from my vantage
Right. Thank you, Director Cummings, because I see in one of the target towns is Somerville, Mass. Growing up in Cambridge, right adjacent, I think they already invented the wheel, for what we're experiencing currently here in Nashua at this particular time. It seems Nashua is about 30 years behind the times to some degree on some things, but it's catching up to us. So I'll open it up to Director Marchand if you want to step on this, if you want.
Sure. I think Director Cummings was right on. Our land use code was written almost 20 years ago based on the master plan at that time, where we truly wanted to be incredibly flexible in how we were encouraging new development and housing downtown. I think our parking regulations have done that to some extent. We are seeing that now, but we're already getting to a point where it's raising more and more concerns. That is exactly a policy decision that will be coming back before this board and is a huge part of how we're going to talk about the master plan. Our land use code reflects Nashua of 20 years ago versus what we are today and where we want to be. And I completely agree that our parking regulations do not necessarily align with a lot of what we hear and get feedback on of the place that we want Nashua to be. So we will be coming forward with the contract for the master plan consultants at the next finance committee meeting, and I'm starting to really lay that out. Again, this new time of COVID is a little bit different discussion wise, but we're looking forward to a really robust conversation that focuses a lot around that, and will certainly piggyback and work very well with the parking study that Director Cummings is talking about.
Very good. Thank you to you both. Members of the committee, any further questions? Alderman Lopez.
Just two questions. The first is a comment for Director Cummings, assuming that I understand correctly. You had planned 9 ward meetings. Given Ward 4's much deeper urban concentration, I would say we probably need a minimum of 3 just in Ward 4 to cover the immediate downtown Main Street area, the number streets in Grand Avenue Central Street area, and then probably Fairmont. Those are very different neighborhoods. Different groups of people are going to have different opinions. So putting them all together in the same room is going to be really difficult to facilitate. But I would also point out that we have other outreach mechanisms that we use regularly in Ward 4, like Coffee with the Mayor might be a good opportunity for Main Street ones, or the annual Mayor's City Hall usually takes place in the Boys and Girls Club or Ledge Street. And then there's also, we have a neighborhood watch meeting that meets regularly on Amherst Street, at Amherst Street School, which is actually Alderman Clee's ward, but that's closer to where the Fairmont people are. But I just want to clarify that I heard we're not talking about a downtown parking or circulation study at this point. We're talking about a citywide overnight parking study.
Correct. This would be citywide. A conversation about, do we want to allow on-street parking citywide? And it doesn't need to be one size fits all. It can be how it's done, where it's done, maybe not done in some areas, done in some areas, is all going to come out through this process. And I defer to all of you as to how you'd like to tackle the individual engagement. I suggested 9 ward meetings. By no means does it need to be 9. Could we do, 3 in Ward 4? The answer is yes. I'm happy to do that. What I ultimately want is I don't want to go through this process and have the members of this body come back and say, I don't believe in the process that just occurred because I don't have confidence in it. And what was teased out is not really what I'm hearing. I'll be wasting the city's money. I'd be wasting a lot of resources and time. That's part of my concern about doing it virtually. But due to the times that we're in, that's really all the options that we have to us. And I'm happy to do it. I don't know what the response will be like. I think that's why the survey is going to be critically important. I think besides the, engagement, approaches that I outlined in the scope, there'll be additional, community feedback given through differing forums and whatnot. But what I want to make explicit was I really think a neighborhood approach needs to be done to have this conversation. How we define neighborhood, I defer to you all because I do think that the neighborhoods are vastly different, and how we define who's in which neighborhood is a very sensitive topic as well. I mean, what's the, where's the line between Crown Hill and French Hill, and, is understandable conversations to be had, and whether we want to drill down that specifically. I think that's a good point. We need to have that conversation. And again, I defer to you all. What I will do and what I wanted to make clear is we can have a neighborhood-based approach, individualized meetings, and we can see what the response is like, and we can see what the feedback is like. I think the feedback will be very different for someone out in Ward 1 as opposed to someone who's in Ward 4. And I don't think putting them all in the same room makes a lot of sense. Whether we maybe only need to do 1 out in Ward 1, maybe we need to do 2 or 3 out in Ward 1. Happy to do it. I defer to you all as to how you'd like to structure it.
Okay, Alderman Lopez.
Just to clarify, I was asking because I didn't know if my adding extra meetings was going to add to the cost of the bill, if you were planning on having the data gatherers there or whatever. So I think if it comes down to how to engage the constituents, I'm totally happy to do that. I won't have any concerns about the process if I'm included in it, if I'm involved in it. And I don't think the neighbors are going to have an issue with the conclusions that are reached as long as they're within a reasonable range of what they are suggesting.
Okay, all set, Alderman Lopez?
Yep.
Okay, Alderman Lowe.
I know this has been a long time coming, and I wonder if at this point, in that it has been so long coming, I have been waiting to understand it better. And I wonder if it's possible to get some information from Director Marchand or Director Cummings about what the history and considerations are, just for each of the aldermen, so that we can, if we're going to be meeting with our wards, we have a reasonable understanding of the background. Sorry, I don't have it. I could do my own research, but I know that you're knowledgeable on this.
Just to clarify, are you talking about specifically to overnight parking?
Yeah.
I mean, just the background context on overnight parking. We can get you a 1-pager just to give you a history of it. I mean,
I guess it does seem simple, but it seems so simple that I've wondered why we need a consultant to do.
Well, I think there's some good data and best practices that would help us, so we're not making knee-jerk reactionary decisions based on just our own world. And to have that outside advice, I think, would be helpful. But at the end of the day, it is a political decision that you need to make. And whether it's what you hear from the consultant is going to sway you or not, I don't know, because ultimately that's going to be driven by your priorities and what your neighborhood is interested in. What the consultant can do is tell you what the best practices are, and provide you some of that information so you can make the best decision possible.
If I could follow up.
Follow up.
Am I correct in understanding that the main thrust of the consultant's project was more what kind, for economic development and community development, what kind of parking facilities and capacity do we need going forward? It wasn't really, the overnight parking in different wards was just a little offshoot of that, correct?
Well, certainly the parking study, the comprehensive parking study that we're holding on right now was a lot more robust. It was going to look at management, operations. It was going to look at facilities. It was going to look at demand. It was going to look at pricing. It was going to look at forecasting of future demand. It was a much more robust scope. The overnight parking was one element of it that is contemplated. What I'm suggesting is just being teased out from that, so we can move forward. Because again, and I'm only having this conversation because I'd been recently approached with the idea that folks want to move forward with overnight parking, and I am trying to be respectful of that. I don't want to hold it up. But I want to provide you all with, the means and the tools to make some important decisions.
Thank you.
I would just like to say to members of the committee, the way that I look at the overnight parking, keep in mind, I don't want to say it's a jump, but it's one of these things that once the cat is out of the bag, you're not going to go up to the constituents and say to reevaluate and change it, completely 180 degrees. So this has to be a very well thought out plan, as we come down into it. And so I'm not too much in favor of any type of quick fix. Since the dawn of the automobile, I don't think there's been overnight parking in the city of Nashua from the street. And as a matter of fact, there was safety concerns both in the history of both the police and fire department in such an issue. But as we look at it, but I have a question for Director Marchand, and that is the master plan. Do you see any benefit in running the two programs together? Because is it not a hand in glove fit? Parking as well as looking at and what ideas Director Cummings too as well.
I think I'll say this, it certainly wouldn't hurt when you're engaging people on a neighborhood level, right? There's only so many times that you can make to get out of your house or to do something, to engage with the government when you have 100 million other things going on in your world. I think that they're very different scales to some extent. The master plan is to talk about some really big topics at the neighborhood level, but not necessarily to drill down into every single little solution, right? And what Tim's trying to do, what the parking study that he's looking at, is to look at real scale solutions. And so what you never want to do with a master plan is talk about potholes, right? You want to talk about strategic decisions and long-term vision. And so they're two different scale discussions. It wouldn't hurt to overlap them, but I don't know that they need to be overlapped. I think they could work fine going near each other.
I guess I would just follow on and say, I think the data that whatever would be collected during the parking conversation, when I say data, I mean the community engagement, the feedback, whatever recommendations, whatever consensus that can be, arrived at would help inform the master plan process.
Yes.
Thank you. Alderman Clee, I do see you, but I do have in front of you Alderman Jettie. Alderman
And
Jettie.
Laws, just for the record, Brendan Laws has had his hand up for a while now too.
Yes, I'll recognize him after. There is a queue. Alderman Jettie.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to say that, from my ward, Ward 5, which is completely different than the downtown, Ward 4 that Alderman Lopez is dealing with. There's I've had people contact me and complain about being able to accommodate, kids who have cars that are home, because of the, home from school because of the COVID thing, or on break or on the summer, whatever, and wanting to be able to park overnight. And they very much want to be able to park overnight on the street. On the other hand, there are people who are adamantly opposed to parking overnight on their street. They don't want strange cars appearing there, and that they're concerned about. So there's a kind of a battle between those 2 points of view in this ward. I can't say that either. I must say that the parking department has been very accommodating to people who have temporary needs for parking overnight. If they call the parking department, the parking department has been very liberal in granting temporary permits, so to speak, to allow them to park overnight on a temporary basis. So I don't think, from my ward, from Ward 5, I don't hear that there's a great demand that this issue be dealt with immediately. So much so that trying to assess people's opinions about this virtually, as opposed to, hopefully this pandemic will be over sometime, where we could, allow people to gather together in the way we're used to, where they could have neighborhood meetings and express their concerns. From my point of view, from my ward, I don't think, rushing to have the consultant deal with this issue, before the pandemic is over, doesn't seem to be an immediate need here. But, that's just my view from Ward 5. And so there, I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Jettie. Alderman Lawson.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to try to connect the two thoughts because Alderman Jettie is completely correct, and Director Cummings is trying to do the right thing. But we are in the middle of a pandemic, and the reason I brought this to Director Cummings' attention is because my first night back at work, I was literally accosted by a constituent who couldn't get his overnight pass because City Hall was closed, and he kept on getting $25 tickets. And I mean, it's just one person. I mean, there's several other people who complained to me. And ultimately, to me, the overnight parking is a poor tax because people who live in Alderman Jettie's ward probably rarely have to worry about parking on the street at night and waking up to a $25 ticket on their car the next morning. Whereas the people who live downtown, who are the people who are working downtown, who are working in restaurants, they don't own a house, they don't necessarily have a ton of money. Those are the ones who are waking up every morning for the $25 ticket. And again, to Alderman Jettie's point, I mean, the parking enforcement may be, liberal with some folks, but they certainly aren't liberal with others. And while we sit here and deliberate about what to do, and there are people who have been out of work for months and they're getting hundreds of dollars of overnight parking tickets. And that's, for me, a very important thing that we should address now. And so while I appreciate Director Cummings coming to us with the idea for this study, I would be much more inclined to say, on the heels of the same thing that we just did with the mask ordinance, we are in the middle of a pandemic, and until the state of emergency is lifted and we get into phase 3, why don't we just put a halt on overnight parking altogether and then give us some more time to think about it? You know, I mean, instead of spending $6,000 on a study, we're not going to lose that much money in revenue from the overnight parking tickets. We also get to see in a small microcosm of time how it's going to affect the city, how it's going to affect the emergency vehicles, which, by the way, that argument doesn't make much sense to me either, because they still go to buildings in the daytime when cars can park on the street. So, I mean, I really appreciate what you're trying to do, Director Cummings. I don't think that, respectfully, I don't think other people appreciate the urgency of this issue. And it's something that I've been knocking on the door of since I was first elected. And I keep on being patient about it and waiting. You know, there's a study coming, there's a study coming. Study hasn't happened. These people are desperate, you know, and they can't afford these tickets. So, I mean, we either need to reduce the fine or eliminate it altogether. And then we can figure out, you know, what the consultant says we should do, in my humble opinion. Thank you, Chairman.
Alderman Clay.
Thank you, Chairman. And I have to apologize to Alderman Laws because I'm going to somewhat disagree with him. I understand what we're saying about just lift up the ban. And I'm going to tell you a few reasons why this could become an issue. And I also want to add to what Alderman Jetty said, in that they have been generous. I've had people that were getting tickets and I asked them to contact parking. And they contact parking on a regular basis and they're not getting the ticket. Parking understands that because people are home during this time and that they have to park out on the street, and they have been extraordinary, I think, in my opinion. The problem that I have with it, and I'm gonna kind of talk backwards from some of the things that Alderman Laws had said. And one of the issues is that when I talked to fire, was that in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. and a fire is going off and their car is parked all over, they don't know which car belongs to who. And one of the case in points I can talk about is that we have here in Ward 3, we have a multiple unit that at one time there was maybe 3 cars that were used for it. Suddenly one of the units, they turned into a 5-bedroom. They turned it into a 5-bedroom and they're renting it out to someone in BAE and they all have a vehicle. So now all of these cars would be parked out on the street. The gentleman that I'm speaking of is not going to be happy with me because I want this to be done right. I don't want to just lift the ban. Now suddenly all these 5 cars are parking on that street where the residents are living and no one knows where those cars belong. I had at one point thought, well, maybe what you could do is you could put a note in your window that says, this car belongs to 9 Maywood Drive. And then I thought, well, people aren't going to want to say exactly where their car belongs to. I don't know the answer to that. That's the relative to the fire and so on. It's because these fires that happen in the middle of the night, during the daytime, they can probably easily say who belongs to this car. Someone's going to see a fire, they're going to run out. When everybody's sleeping, it's not quite as easy when they have to get the ambulance and so on. And some of the streets in Ward 3, French Hill and so on, can be narrow enough that this could become an issue. And I don't want to create that issue. I'd really like it to be done in a very, I don't think this is like the mask law. I think this really needs to be done in a very specific kind of study. I think I think that our parking enforcement has been very, very generous. I think on a case by case basis. So I would hope that the people that are, you know, and I know that they're probably coming down hard on you. I would hope that they would try to get a hold of parking enforcement and see if we can't work something out. Maybe we can do something on that nature. But I don't really want to see this just be lifted up. We have too many narrow streets through Ward 3. And, you know, unlike Ward 5, where they're kind of wide, I have some very wide streets. My street, for instance, Maywood Drive, if everybody were to park out on the street, which has happened from my neighbors that have had parties and people have stayed overnight, there's still plenty of ease to get through and so on, even if people parked all the way up and down the street. That's not quite so much in some of the more narrow streets like Norton Street and so on. So I think this needs to be a really thoughtful process and don't just lift it up in the city. And that is one of those genies, you're never going to get back into that bottle. I really don't think you're going to do that. Again, just my opinion. So and I apologize for disagreeing with you, Alderman Laws, because we always seem to be on the same page, but.
And Alderman Laws, I will recognize you in a second, but before we get into the great debate, Director Cummings has agreed to stick around, and this is not the only subject. So if you want to take the full meeting on this particular subject, feel free. As chairman, I will moderate. But however, there's other topics that need to be discussed. So, and also there is a possibility of a non-public session. To that in mind, Alderman Laws.
Thank you, Chairman. I said my piece. I can just point to this meeting to anybody who comes to me with overnight parking problems in the future, and they'll see that I said what I said, and you guys said what you said. And we can continue on. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Laws. Any other further questions by members of the board? Seeing none. Next on discussion, Director Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, couple items I wanted to talk about. First was, and it was a memo sent earlier in the week, which I believe was in your packet, and I came, I believe, at the request at Chairman Tenza, which was just a quick overview and update on the new market tax credit effort. So there's been no real material change. We're in a holding pattern. I will note that we're anticipating announcements anytime now. We were told after the 4th of July is when we should anticipate hearing something. So we're waiting. We're preparing and working as though we're going to be in receipt of a new market tax credit. But obviously we can't count our chickens until the eggs hatch. So that's really all I was going to say on that, but I didn't know if there was any particular questions on new markets.
Any questions by members of the committees?
There's also one thing, Mr. Chairman, that I was going to say is I was actually thinking of hosting just a new market tax credit work session, maybe in the afternoon sometime over the next week or so, of just like a new market tax credit 101. I've actually did it for this body at one of your meetings 2-3 years ago now. I know we have some newer members to the Board of Aldermen who may have not have seen that, or some folks just may want a refresher on how it works. I was thinking that that's something I would do in the next week or so. And, and to Alderman Laws's point, there's just maybe sometimes you just don't want to revisit things, which is fine too. It is a very complicated program.
Very good. Any questions by members of the committee? Seeing none. Next on that you are willing to discuss. Oh.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hold on, Director Cummings.
Yep.
Alderman Lou, did you want to have a question?
Yes, I did. I'm sorry, I'm not on the committee and I was waiting for, just a quick question. I understand that Sullivan Brady was part of a large new market tax credit?
No.
Okay. Could you just clarify? My husband shouted into me something about that, and he said it had to do with the Performing Arts Center.
So what I believe may be referencing, and it has nothing to do with new market tax credits, is Brady Sullivan through Arthur Sullivan pledged a large contribution. I don't know the exact number. I believe it was in the newspaper recently. To the Performing Arts Center using CDFA tax credits.
Okay.
Which is a different type of tool being utilized.
Right. Thank you.
Further questions by members in attendance? You're none. Segue into Director Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So School Street development, I just thought I would be remiss not to bring this up and just quickly talk to you all, because I do know that this is an important item for PEDC and infrastructure. And, it's been one of my operational goals in my budget for the last 3 or 4 years, where we've talked about developing the School Street parking lot. And it's one of the 3 goals I've set for myself over the years. And we're getting close to it. There's legislation that was filed. It's in the Budget Review Committee right now. where we're hoping it will be heard and voted out in short order. I do know the Corporation Council is working on questions that were proposed by Alderman Jettie. And I believe that they're making their way back to the Budget Review Committee, as well as there's been some concerns or some angst from some of the abutters about the loss of parking. And of course, change is scary. And that's what this is change. And so being very sympathetic and understanding that concern, the mayor and I have been outreaching to all the abutters and to all the neighbors to talk about the development. I'm not sure we're going to be able to satisfy all the abutters and their concerns, but we are certainly trying, because the last thing we want to do is make anyone feel like they're being put out. But it is a project that we're still working on, and I just thought I would touch base with you all on it because it's been something that's, I know, of a hot topic lately.
Thank you. Director Cummings, if I may. I am excited with this project because that School Street parking lot at one time historically was residential, part of a neighborhood, even though it was blighted at the time. It is referring back to its original residential status. But I see adjacent to part of the parking lot, that property, is the Pennachuck Corporation, and they are building a new parking garage. Could that be a good neighbor? Could a policy be formed with a good neighbor to try to assist one of the abutters that may have some concern in the parking situation in that neighborhood?
It's definitely something that we could explore. I think that is a great conversation we should have. We should look at, and I've said this before, parking should be looked at as a utility, managed for the common good and in a downtown area. And although it would be private parking, developing shared parking arrangements is a best practice that we should try to encourage. And it's definitely a point well taken that I will see if there's any appetite to try to help alleviate the parking concerns to see if that supply is available.
Okay. Any questions by members of the joint committees in attendance? Seeing none. Okay. We do have the possibility of a non-public session if the joint committee so wants to get into it. What we're going to discuss is the information that has been provided on the Burke Street properties. The reason we're going to go into non-public session is this is a real estate negotiation that is private between the city of Nashua and the purchaser of the property. To respect that, I'm going to refer to the state RSAs, which say that for that reason, we can go into a non-public session. I wish I had the proper verbiage, but this was something that Director Cummings said that he's willing, with additional raw information that has just occurred, that he's willing to discuss while the two committees are in joint session. So I would like to take that opportunity. So therefore, I would be looking for a motion to go by the guidelines of the state RSA, where it could have an effect on the negotiations for the city of financial gains, and to go into a non-public session. Do I have such a motion? Alderman Lopez.
I am willing to make the motion, but I would also like to ask the chair. We had a non-public session regarding the School Street property in the past. What is the procedure for unsealing that? I mean, it feels like the cat's out of the bag for that.
Well, if your relation to what we just discussed, that wasn't anything that wasn't into the non-public.
It was non-public.
Right. I think Director Cummings, and help me out if you may, this is going to get into possibilities of, negotiations and everything else, an update And I think you can understand we don't want that out there in the public at this particular time. In order to accept it and accept any deals, I want to assure the public when it comes at the right time, all this will be brought up in a public format.
All right, so I guess my question then to you as chair is, can we discuss that, unsealing that non-public session after we conduct this one?
I'll refer you to the legal department on that.
Okay. Then I move that we move into non-public session to discuss the information that you had referred to.
Thank you. And if you could hold the motion, Director Cummings, did I fairly answer that correctly? Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. We have a motion by Alderman Lopez to go into non-public session with the guidelines of the RSA for private information. Will the clerk please call the roll? It'll have to be by roll call.
Yes. Alderman at Large, Michael O'Brien.
Yes, excuse me, Jeff. We do have a question from Director. Yes.
You be coming back?
I think that exactly at this point, this is the last item that is kind of Director Cummings you wish to discuss.
Yeah, this would be the last item. Correct.
And Jeff, and to the public, thank you, Jeff, for reminding me. At this particular point to the public, we're going to discuss this, and then we're going to convene and thus terminate the meetings, as what we have done in the past. So after we get the update from Director Cummings.
Can I amend my motion to be after public comment then?
I don't have on my script public comment, but anybody want to have public comment?
I just figured there's people here. We shouldn't just close the window if they want to say something.
Is there anybody out there that want to have public comment? Seeing none. We have a pending. You have a pending motion in front of us. And the motion is to go into non-public session. Will the clerk please call the roll?
O'Brien.
Yes.
Alderman Lopez.
Yes.
Alderman Schmidt votes yes. Alderman Jettie. Alderman Jettie. Alderman Tenza.
Yes.
Alderman Clemens. Alderman Brandon Laws.
Yes.
That would be 5 yes.
We are going into non-public session. Anybody got an iPhone time or Android time?
9:08.
Huh?
9:08 p.m.
Thank you, Alderman Laws. We went into non-public, terminated the meeting, went into non-public session at 9:08.